Love isn't built on perfection, it's built on forgiveness. Some learned this through gentle lessons, but for Queen Senna and their son God's Way, this truth would come crashing into their lives like a storm that threatens to tear apart everything they held dear. Love has a way of deepening with time, like wine aging in oak barrels, growing richer and more complex with each passing year. Such was the case for Queen Senna, whose marriage had flourished over decades into something rare and precious. At 50, Queen still looked at her 60-year-old husband with the same sparkle in her eyes that had been there when they first met, and Senna's gentle touch still brought the same warmth to her heart. Their home was filled with the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from years of understanding each other's rhythms. They had mastered the art of conversation without words, a raised eyebrow over morning coffee, a soft smile across the dinner table, the slight brush of fingers while passing in the hallway. Each gesture carried the weight of their shared history, speaking volumes in the quiet moments they treasured together. Into this tapestry of love they had woven their greatest joy, their son God's Way. Now grown and carving his own path at a prestigious company, he had become everything they'd hoped for: independent, successful, and most importantly, kind-hearted. Despite his busy schedule and his own place in the city, God's Way made it a point to visit regularly, bringing with him the energy of youth that brightened their peaceful home. These visits were more than mere family obligations. They were celebrations of their bond, filled with laughter that echoed through the house as God's Way shared stories from his work, while Queen prepared his favorite meals, and Senna offered sage advice about life's challenges. The three of them would often sit in their cozy living room until late in the evening, time seeming to slow down just for them. What made their family special wasn't just the love they shared, but the respect that flowed between them like a gentle stream. God's Way admired how his parents had maintained their romance through the years, often catching glimpses of them dancing in the kitchen when they thought no one was watching. Queen and Senna, in turn, respected their son's independence while keeping their door and hearts always open for him. Their home had become a sanctuary where love grew stronger with each passing season. The walls held memories of countless family dinners, holiday celebrations, and quiet Sunday afternoons. Even the garden, tended lovingly by both Queen and Senna, reflected their shared life, carefully nurtured roses blooming alongside sturdy trees they had planted when God's Way was born. In a world where relationships often seemed fragile, their family stood as a testament to the power of enduring love and unwavering commitment. They had built something beautiful together, a harmony of three hearts beating in perfect rhythm, each playing their part in the symphony of their shared life. It was more than just a family, it was a masterpiece of love, respect, and joy, painted in the gentle strokes of everyday moments and cherished memories. The letter that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and official looking among the usual bills and advertisements. Senna's hands trembled slightly as he read it, his eyes growing wider with each line. A prestigious company in the United States was offering him a 1-year contract, the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, with enough money to secure their family's future. When Senna shared the news over dinner that evening, Queen's reaction was immediate and jubilant. She leapt from her chair, pulling him into an impromptu dance around their dining room. "My brilliant husband," she exclaimed, her face glowing with pride. "I knew someone would finally see what I've always known about you." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon they were both laughing, caught up in the moment of possibility. But later that night, as the house grew quiet and the initial excitement faded, a different reality began to settle over Queen like an evening fog. She sat alone in their bedroom, running her fingers over Senna's side of the bed, the same spot where he had slept beside her for decades. The thought of it being empty for an entire year made her throat tighten. In the dim light of their bedside lamp, Queen's mind wandered through all the small moments that made up their daily life together: morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, the way Senna would absently massage her shoulders while she cooked, their evening walks in the garden. A year suddenly seemed like an eternity when measured in these lost moments. She tried to push away the creeping anxiety, telling herself she was being selfish. This was their chance at financial security, a reward for all Senna's years of hard work. But the thought of sleeping alone, of facing empty evenings and quiet mornings, filled her with a dread she couldn't shake. When Senna found her sitting in the dark, tears glimmering in her eyes, she tried to hide her distress. But he knew her too well, could read the worry in the set of her shoulders. the fear in her downcast eyes. "Tell me," he whispered, sitting beside her. "I'm scared," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. "A year is so long, Senna." What if she trailed off, unable to voice her deeper fears about their relationship withstanding such a separation? Senna pulled her close, his familiar warmth both a comfort and a reminder of what she would soon be missing. "It's just temporary," he assured her, but even as he spoke the words, they both felt the weight of them. A year might be temporary in the grand scheme of things, but in the intimate geography of a marriage, it was an ocean of time to cross. That night, neither of them slept much. They lay awake, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenge ahead, while the moon cast long shadows across their bedroom floor, shadows that seemed to hint at the longer ones yet to come. The morning of Senna's departure arrived too quickly, the sun rising on a day Queena had been dreading for weeks. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers, but for Queena, everything seemed to move in slow motion as she stood with Senna at the security checkpoint, their fingers intertwined as if letting go might break something precious and irreplaceable. "I'll call you every day," Senna promised, his voice rough with emotion. He reached up to brush away a tear from Queena's cheek, his touch lingering as if trying to memorize the feeling of her skin beneath his fingers. "The time will pass before you know it, my love. I'll be counting every moment until I'm back home with you." Queena tried to smile through her tears, but her lips trembled with the effort. She straightened Senna's collar, a familiar gesture she had performed countless times over their years together, but now it felt like a final attempt to hold on to normalcy. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," she whispered, her voice catching. "Don't work too hard, remember to eat properly, and call you every day," Senna finished, pulling her close one last time. "I promise, my heart." He held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, his own eyes growing misty, despite his attempts to stay strong for her. Standing slightly apart, Godsway watched his parents farewell with a tightness in his chest. He had never seen them separated for more than a few days, and the depth of their emotion made his own heart ache. When the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, he stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on his mother's shoulder. Senna turned to his son, embracing him firmly. "Take care of your mother," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of trust and responsibility. "She'll need you more than ever now." "I will," Dad Godsway promised solemnly. "Don't worry about anything here. I'll make sure Mom isn't alone." As Senna picked up his carry-on bag and turned toward security, Queena made a small, involuntary sound of distress. He quickly turned back, crossing the distance between them in 2 strides, and gathered her in his arms one final time. Their last kiss was brief but filled with unspoken words and promises. Then he was walking away, each step seeming to stretch the invisible thread between them until Queena felt it might snap. She watched through tear-blurred eyes as he passed through security, turning back one last time to wave before disappearing around the corner. Godsway wrapped an arm around his mother's trembling shoulders, supporting her as she leaned into him. "Let's go home, Mom," he said gently. "We'll get through this together." As they walked out of the airport, the morning sun cast long shadows behind them, and Queena couldn't help but feel that a part of her heart had just boarded that plane, leaving an emptiness she wasn't sure how to fill. The year ahead stretched before her like an endless road, with only the promise of daily calls and her son's steadfast presence to light the way. The echo of her footsteps in the empty house haunted Queena more than she could have imagined. Each room held memories that now seemed to mock her solitude: the kitchen where she and Senna would dance while cooking dinner, their bedroom where his pillow still held his scent, slowly fading day by day. Though Senna called faithfully each evening as promised, his voice through the phone speaker only emphasized the physical void his absence had created. Nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around her like a heavy blanket. The bed felt too large, too cold, and her thoughts would spiral into dark corners she'd never known existed in her mind. Sometimes she caught herself talking to Senna's empty chair at dinner, only to be startled by the lack of response. The breaking point came one stormy evening when thunder rattled the windows. Usually Senna would hold her during storms, making playful comments about nature's symphony. But now, alone in their big house, every crack of thunder felt like it was shaking loose another piece of her resolve. With trembling fingers, she dialed Godsway's number. "The house," she whispered, her voice cracking, "is too big, too empty. I can't stay here alone anymore." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. raw and honest in their desperation. Godsway's response was immediate and warm. "Mom, pack your bags. My home is yours too." It always has been. The relief in her sob was answer enough. Moving in with Godsway brought unexpected gifts wrapped in the package of change. Their relationship, always loving but somewhat formal, began to transform. Evening rituals emerged naturally, sharing stories over dinner, watching old movies together, taking walks in the neighborhood as the sun set. Godsway discovered his mother's talent for storytelling, especially when she spoke about her early days with his father, and Queena found herself seeing her son, not just as her child, but as a thoughtful, compassionate adult. They developed a comfortable rhythm. Each morning, Godsway would make coffee for both of them before heading to work, just the way she liked it. Queena would send him off with a packed lunch, something she hadn't done since his school days. In the evenings, they would share the day's events, their conversations growing deeper and more meaningful with each passing week. Sometimes when Queena would grow quiet, lost in thoughts of Senna, Godsway would gently draw her back with questions about her youth or ask for advice about his own life. He had an intuitive sense of when she needed distraction and when she needed space to feel her feelings. Though the ache of Senna's absence never truly subsided, Queena found herself growing stronger in unexpected ways. She discovered reserves of resilience she didn't know she possessed, and a new dimension to her relationship with her son that she would have missed had circumstances been different. It wasn't the life she had planned, but in its own way it was helping her survive the longest separation she had ever known from her beloved husband. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows when Ben knocked on the door, expecting to find his friend Godsway. Instead, he found Queena, her lateness having pushed her to an edge she never thought she'd approach. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes people do things they later regret. Something shifted in Queena's mind when she saw Ben standing there, young and uncertain on her doorstep. The months of solitude, of missing Senna's touch, of sleeping in an empty bed, had created a void that clouded her judgment. When Ben explained he was looking for Godsway, she felt an impulsive urge she couldn't or wouldn't suppress. "He's at work," she said, but instead of letting Ben leave, she reached for his arm. The touch was electric, forbidden, and terrifying. In that moment, all rational thoughts seemed to evaporate like morning dew under a harsh sun. Ben, caught off guard and swept up in the unexpected intensity of the moment, found himself following her lead despite his better judgment. What followed was a blur of poor decisions and overwhelming emotions, a moment of weakness that would cast long shadows over all their lives. As they moved deeper into the house, both of them seemed to be operating on autopilot, their actions guided by a force stronger than reason but weaker than true love. The aftermath was immediate and crushing. Ben sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, the weight of what they'd done pressing down on him like a physical force. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Godsway, he's my friend. How could I betray him like this?" Queena, wrapped tightly in a blanket, felt shame wash over her in waves. The brief escape from loneliness had given way to something far worse, the knowledge that she had betrayed not just Senna, but their entire family. The sanctity of their home, the trust of their son, the vows she had made to her husband, all of it lay shattered around her like broken glass. "Please," she pleaded with Ben, her voice barely audible, "no one can know about this. Never tell Godsway or Senna. Please." The desperation in her voice matched the panic in Ben's eyes as he nodded, already backing toward the door, eager to escape the scene of their shared mistake. After Ben left, Queena sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs. The house that had felt so empty before now felt suffocating with the weight of her guilt. She could already feel the ripples of their actions spreading outward, threatening to destroy everything she held dear. In trying to fill the void of loneliness, she had created an even greater emptiness, one carved out by betrayal and shame. The sun continued its descent outside, casting ever longer shadows across the room, but the darkest shadow now lay across Queena's heart, where the light of her love for Senna suddenly seemed dim against the darkness of what she had done. The truth has a way of surfacing, like a bubble rising through water, impossible to stop once it begins its journey. For Queena, it started with a stumble, then a fall that sent shooting pain through her body. Godsway found her crumpled on the kitchen floor, pale and trembling, and rushed her to the hospital without a second thought. In the sterile white examination room, the doctor's face grew increasingly concerned as he noted signs of recent physical strain. With professional delicacy, he pulled Godsway aside, speaking in low tones about his findings. These marks, they're recent, the doctor explained carefully. Given that your father has been away, he left the sentence hanging, heavy with implication. Godsway's world tilted on its axis. The pieces began falling into place: his mother's recent odd behavior, Ben's sudden avoidance of their house, the guilty looks he'd caught but dismissed. His mind raced back to that day he'd come home and found his mother lying down, claiming exhaustion. The truth he'd been blind to now seemed written in neon lights. When Quina regained consciousness, she found Godsway sitting beside her bed, his face a mask of contained anguish. "Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling with emotion, "I need you to tell me what happened. The truth, please." His eyes, so much like his father's, bore into hers with an intensity that broke down her remaining defenses. The confession came in broken whispers, each word seeming to physically pain her. As she spoke of loneliness, of weakness, of Ben's visit and what followed, she watched her son's face crumple with each revelation. Godsway stood abruptly, placing the small hospital room like a caged animal, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I have to tell Dad," he finally said, his voice hollow. "He needs to know." The call to Senna was the hardest thing Quina had ever done. The initial silence on the other end of the line when she finished speaking was deafening. When Senna finally responded, his voice was thick with pain. "How could you, Quina? After all our years together." The words she had dreaded most came next: "Don't be in the house when I return." In the days that followed, Quina moved through life like a ghost. Godsway, torn between love for his mother and loyalty to his father, sent her back to their empty house. He had been arrested, his friendship shattered beyond recognition, the betrayal too deep to forgive in the heat of discovery. Alone in the house that had once been filled with so much love, Quina faced the full weight of her actions. Every photo on the wall, every shared memory in every corner, now seemed to accuse her. The bed where she had betrayed her marriage vows felt like a monument to her shame. She spent her nights curled up on the couch, unable to sleep in their bedroom, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor and wondering if some mistakes were too big to ever be forgiven. The aftermath of betrayal rippled through their lives like a stone thrown into still water, distorting everything it touched. Godsway, wrestling with anger and heartbreak, could no longer bear to see his mother in his home. The same spaces where they had found comfort in each other's company now felt tainted. With gentle but firm words, he told her she needed to return to her own house. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly as he helped her pack her bags. "But I can't. I just can't have you here right now." The words hung between them like a physical barrier, replacing the warmth they had shared just days before. In a separate act of pain and justice, Godsway had been arrested. The police came quietly, but the neighborhood still buzzed with whispers as they led him away. Ben didn't resist his own guilt, had already imprisoned him long before the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The charge was taking advantage of a vulnerable woman, though everyone involved knew the situation was far more complex than any legal document could capture. Senna's words over the phone echoed in Quina's mind as she returned to their family home. "Don't be there when I come back," simple words that carried the weight of decades of trust now broken. She moved through the empty house like a ghost, touching photographs of happier times, each memory now sharp enough to draw blood. The house that had once felt too big in Senna's absence now felt like a prison of her own making. Every room held echoes of their life together: the kitchen where they had danced, the garden they had tended, the bedroom they had shared. Now each space was filled with the suffocating weight of her shame. Family dinners, once warm and lively affairs, ceased entirely. Godsway buried himself in work, unable to face the fractures in his family. His phone calls to his father were strained, both men carefully avoiding mention of Quina, though her absence hung heavy in every conversation. When he had to communicate with his mother, he did so through brief, formal text messages that broke her heart with their politeness. Senna, still abroad, found himself unable to focus on his work. Colleagues noticed the change in him: the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, how he would stare at his wedding ring during meetings, lost in thought. At night, he would pick up his phone to call Quina as he had done every evening, only to put it down again, the pain too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Quina lived in a limbo of her own creation. She would wake in the middle of the night, reaching for Senna's side of the bed, only to remember not just his absence, but the reason she was now truly alone. She kept her phone close, hoping for calls that didn't come, checking messages that never arrived. The silence of her family was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own quiet sobs in the dark hours of the night. In the space where love had once filled every corner, now there was only the hollow echo of what they had lost. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of pain. For Senna, thousands of miles away in a foreign land, the anger that had initially consumed him slowly began to give way to something else, an aching emptiness that no amount of work could fill. Each night he would find himself staring at old photos of Quina on his phone, remembering not her betrayal, but the decades of love that had come before. One sleepless night, as he watched the city lights twinkle outside his hotel window, a realization washed over him like a gentle wave. Despite everything, his love for Quina remained. It was wounded, yes, but not dead, and perhaps that love was strong enough to build something new from the ashes of what was broken. With trembling fingers, he typed out a message he never thought he'd send. Come home. We need to talk. 5 simple words that carried the weight of possibility, of forgiveness, of hope. When Quina received the message, she read it over and over until her vision blurred with tears. She returned to their home with nothing but humility and remorse in her heart. Their first meeting was awkward, filled with long silences and careful words, but beneath the tension ran an undercurrent of their decades-long connection, a foundation too strong to crumble completely. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Quina whispered, her voice raw with emotion. But if you'll let me, I want to spend every day proving that your love and trust aren't misplaced. She reached across the table, not quite touching him, letting her hand rest in the space between them, an invitation, not a demand. Senna looked at her hand, then at her face, the face he had loved for so many years, now lined with grief and regret. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his hand over hers. We'll take it one day at a time, he said softly. Meanwhile, Godsway had been doing his own soul-searching. Seeing his parents' tentative steps toward reconciliation made him reconsider his harsh judgment of Ben. He visited his former friend in jail, seeing not just the betrayal now, but also the genuine remorse and regret in Ben's eyes. We're all capable of mistakes, Godsway said, as he processed Ben's release papers. What matters is how we learn from them. The two men wouldn't return to their former friendship, but they could acknowledge the complex humanity in each other. As weeks turned into months, the family began to heal. It wasn't a return to what was impossible. Instead, it was the careful construction of something new, built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom and humility. His family dinners resumed, though now with deeper appreciation for their time together. Conversations became more honest, more vulnerable. They had all learned that love wasn't just about the joyful moments, but about the capacity to face darkness together and emerge stronger. Their story became not just one of betrayal, but of the extraordinary power of forgiveness to transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength and understanding. Like a garden after a storm, their family began to bloom again, though in ways different from before. The process of healing wasn't linear. Some days felt like stepping backward, while others brought unexpected moments of grace. But slowly, steadily, they found their way back to each other. Family dinners resumed, first in short, awkward gatherings, then gradually lengthening as comfort returned. One evening, as Quina served Senna's favorite dish, something she hadn't dared to make since her transgression, he reached for her hand across the table. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness this time, but of gratitude for this second chance. I never thought we'd be here again, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of their journey. Neither did I, Senna admitted, his voice gentle. But sometimes the things we think will break us end up showing us how strong we really are. Godsway watched his parents' slow dance of reconciliation with a newfound understanding of love's complexity. The black and white certainty of his youth had given way to softer shades of gray. He saw now that people could be both flawed and worthy of love, that forgiveness wasn't a sign of weakness but of profound strength. The healing came in small moments, Senna and Quina taking evening walks in their garden again, though now their conversations went deeper, touching on fears and vulnerabilities they'd never shared before. Godsway joining them for Sunday brunches, bringing not just his presence but also his growing wisdom about the intricacies of human nature. Even Ben found a measure of peace, Though he and God's way would never regain their former closeness, they had reached an understanding that acknowledged both the gravity of what happened and the possibility of redemption. When they passed each other in the street, they could now nod in recognition of their shared humanity. The experience had changed them all. Quina learned that true remorse meant not just feeling sorry, but working every day to rebuild what was broken. Senna discovered that forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a daily choice, one that grew easier with time. God's way came to understand that love could survive even the deepest wounds, emerging stronger for having been tested. Their home, once filled with shadows of betrayal, gradually became a place of healing. Photos that had been turned face down were restored to their places, though now they told a different story, not just of happy moments, but of a family that had walked through fire together and survived. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, the setting sun casting a warm glow through the windows, Senna looked at his family and saw not the scars of their past, but the beauty of their resilience. They had learned that love wasn't about perfection but about perseverance, not about avoiding mistakes but about how we rise after falling. Their story had become not just one of betrayal and forgiveness, but a testament to the extraordinary capacity of the human heart to heal, to grow, and to love again, perhaps more deeply than before.